I'm 84 years old now. My hands shake a little when I hold my coffee in the morning. My back hurts when the weather changes. And sometimes I forget small things like where I left my glasses. But there is one memory I have never forgotten. Not for one single day. It happened more than 50 years ago. During the war. Most people think the hardest part of war is the bullets, or the explosions, or watching your friends die beside you. They're wrong. The hardest battle I ever fought was not on the battlefield. It was in my heart, and the person who wounded me the most was not the enemy. It was my wife. Her name was Sarah. Back then I was only 29 years old, young, strong, and proud to wear my uniform. I had just joined the army 2 years earlier, and when the war started they sent our unit overseas. The night before I left for deployment, Sarah held my hand so tightly I thought she would never let go. She cried quietly while resting her head on my shoulder. She kept saying the same thing again and again. "Come back to me. Just promise me you'll come back." I smiled and kissed her forehead. I told her something every soldier says before leaving. "Don't worry. I'll be home before you know it." The truth is, no soldier ever knows if he will come home. But we say it anyway, because the people we love need to believe it. Before I left she gave me something, a small photograph of the two of us, standing in front of our little house. She wrote something on the back. "No matter how long the war lasts, my heart will always wait for you." I kept that photo in my chest pocket, every single day during the war. Sometimes during quiet nights in the camp, I would take it out and stare at it for hours. The other soldiers used to laugh at me. They said, "Robert, you stare at that photo like it's treasure." And I would always answer the same way. Because it is. That photo reminded me why I was fighting. Not just for my country, but for the life waiting for me back home. Our small house, our future children, and the woman who promised she would wait for me. At least, that's what I believed. War changes a man. In the beginning you are scared of everything. The sounds, the darkness, the gunfire. But after a while, fear becomes normal. You stop thinking about death, and start thinking about survival. During those months, the only thing that kept me sane were the letters from Sarah. Every 2 weeks a letter would arrive. Her handwriting always made me smile before I even opened it. She wrote about small things, the garden behind our house, the neighbor's dog, the grocery store owner who always asked about me. Those letters felt like pieces of home, and every time I finished reading one, I would read it again and again, until I practically memorized every word. The men in my unit did the same with their own letters. Those little envelopes were the only warmth we had in a place full of cold nights and gunfire. But after about 6 months, something started to change. At first I didn't notice it, but slowly the letters became shorter. The warmth in her words began to fade. Instead of 3 pages, there were only 1. Instead of long stories, there were only simple sentences. I told myself she was probably just busy. Life back home continues even when soldiers are fighting overseas. But then something else happened. 1 month. No letter came at all. I waited every day. Every time the mail truck arrived, my heart would start beating faster. But my name was never called. Another 2 weeks passed. Still nothing. For the first time since the war began, I felt a strange feeling in my chest. Not fear, not sadness, something worse. Doubt. My friend Daniel noticed it first. Daniel and I shared the same tent. We had fought side by side since the beginning. One night, while we were sitting near the fire, he asked me, "No letter again today?" I shook my head. He stayed quiet for a moment. Then he said something that I will never forget. Sometimes silence tells you more than words. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. I kept telling myself everything was fine. Sarah loved me. She promised she would wait. And promises meant something. At least, that's what I believed back then. But 3 weeks later, a letter finally arrived. The envelope looked different somehow. I remember staring at it for a long time before opening it. Something in my gut told me this letter was going to change everything. And I was right, because inside that envelope was the beginning of the greatest betrayal of my life. My hands were shaking when I finally opened the envelope. I remember staring at Sarah's handwriting for a few seconds before I even unfolded the paper. For months those letters had been the only thing keeping me connected to the life I left behind. Every word from her felt like a piece of home. But that day, something felt different. I slowly opened the letter. It was shorter than any letter she had ever written before. Only a few paragraphs. No long stories. No little details about the house. No jokes about the neighbor's dog. Just a few cold sentences. She wrote that things were busy back home. She wrote that she hoped the war would end soon. And then there was one sentence that stayed in my mind forever. She wrote, "I've been spending more time with friends lately. It helps pass the time while you're gone." At first that sentence didn't seem strange. Of course she had friends. Of course she needed company while I was gone. But something about the way she wrote it made my stomach twist. There was no warmth in the letter. No, "I miss you." No, "I love you." Just words. Empty words. That night I sat outside the tent staring at the fire. Daniel came and sat beside me. He asked if the letter finally arrived. I nodded and handed it to him. He read it silently. When he finished, he gave the letter back without saying anything. But I could see something in his eyes. Concern. Daniel had a younger sister back home. He understood people better than most soldiers did. After a long silence, he finally said something. "Robert, when people stop writing from the heart, it usually means their heart is somewhere else." I laughed it off. I told him he was overthinking it. Sarah loved me. She promised she would wait. War just makes people tired. That's all. But deep inside, something had already begun to break. Weeks passed. Then months. Her letters became even more rare. Sometimes an entire month would pass without a single word from her. Meanwhile, the war around us only got worse. Our unit moved deeper into dangerous territory. Gunfire became part of everyday life. Explosions echoed through the nights. Men I had eaten breakfast with in the morning were gone by evening. War teaches you many brutal lessons. But the hardest lesson is loneliness. Because even when you are surrounded by soldiers, you still feel alone. Especially when the one person who promised to wait for you stops writing. One evening our unit finally received permission to make short phone calls home. It was rare during those days. The communication lines were terrible, and soldiers only had a few minutes. But when I heard the news my heart started racing. After months of silence, I would finally hear Sarah's voice. When it was my turn, I walked into the small communication tent. The officer dialed the number for me. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then someone picked up. "Hello." It was her voice. For a moment I forgot how to speak. Just hearing her voice again felt unreal. Finally I said her name. "Sarah, it's me." There was a pause on the line. A long pause. Then she said quietly, "Oh, Robert." Not, "Robert, I miss you." Not, "Robert, thank God you're safe." Just, "Oh, Robert." I tried to ignore the strange feeling growing in my chest. I asked her how she was. She said she was fine. I asked about the house. She said everything was okay. Our conversation felt awkward, like 2 strangers trying to talk. Then suddenly I heard something in the background. A man's voice. It was faint, but it was clearly there. I froze. "Who's that?" I asked. Another pause. Then she answered quickly. "Just a friend visiting." Something about the way she said it made my stomach drop. Before I could ask anything else, the officer tapped my shoulder. My time was up. The call ended, and I stood there holding the silent phone in my hand. Daniel was waiting outside. He saw my face and immediately knew something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked. I told him about the phone call, about the voice in the background, about the strange way Sarah spoke to me. Daniel didn't say anything for a moment. Then he sighed quietly. "Robert, sometimes the war isn't the only thing happening back home." I didn't want to believe him. I refused to believe him, because if he was right, then everything I had been fighting for, everything I had been surviving for, was already gone. But 2 months later, the truth finally arrived. Not in a phone call, not in a rumor, but in a letter. And that letter destroyed the last piece of my heart that the war hadn't already taken. 2 months after that phone call, the letter arrived. I still remember the day clearly. The sky was grey and the air smelled like rain. Our unit had just returned from a long patrol, and everyone was exhausted. Some of the men collapsed onto their beds the moment we reached camp, but I stayed outside, because the mail truck had just arrived. Every soldier knows that feeling. Even after months of disappointment, your heart still hopes that today might be the day. The officer started calling out names one by one. Soldiers rushed forward to grab their letters, smiling like children on Christmas morning. Then I heard my name. Robert Harris. My heart jumped. I walked over and took the envelope from his hand. At first glance it looked like Sarah's handwriting again, but something about the envelope felt heavier. I sat down on a wooden crate and slowly opened it. Inside was not just a letter. There was also a photograph. My hands suddenly felt cold. I unfolded the letter first. The words were simple, cold, straight to the point. She wrote that the war had changed things. She wrote that waiting had become too difficult. She wrote that life had moved on. Then came the sentence that cut deeper than any bullet I had ever faced. "I've met someone else." I remember staring at those 4 words for a long time. The sounds of the camp faded away. The soldiers talking around me. The trucks moving. The distant gunfire. Everything became quiet, like the world had suddenly stopped. My eyes slowly moved to the photograph, and that's when my heart finally broke. The picture showed Sarah standing beside a man I had never seen before. They were smiling, standing in front of the small house we once shared. The same house where we promised to build our future. The same house where she once told me she would wait for me forever. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped the photo. Daniel sat down beside me. He didn't even need to ask what happened. He looked at the photograph and quietly put his hand on my shoulder. No words, just silence. That night I didn't sleep. I sat outside the tent staring at the sky until the sun began to rise. Something inside me had changed. Not just sadness. Not just anger. Something deeper. The part of me that believed in promises had disappeared. But the strange thing is, war doesn't stop for broken hearts. The next morning we were sent out on another mission. Bullets didn't care about my pain. Explosions didn't care about my marriage. War continued exactly the same. And somehow, so did I. I fought harder after that. Not because I was brave, but because I had nothing left to lose. Months later the war finally ended. Our unit returned home. Many soldiers were greeted by families waiting at the airport. Wives, children, parents, everyone hugging and crying with joy. But when I walked through those doors, no one was waiting for me. Just a quiet taxi ride back to an empty house. Sarah had already moved out. Most of the furniture was gone. Even the picture frames had disappeared from the walls. The house felt like a stranger's place. The only thing she left behind was the photograph I carried in my pocket during the war. The one she gave me before I left. The one where we were standing together in front of the house. I stared at it for a long time. Then I flipped it over and read the words she wrote years earlier. No matter how long the war lasts, my heart will always wait for you. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because sometimes laughter is the only thing that keeps you from breaking completely. Life moved on after that. I never saw Sarah again. People asked me later if I hated her. But the truth is, war had already taught me something important. Holding on to anger only gives more power to the person who hurt you. So I let it go. Years passed. Decades. Now I'm 84 years old. The war is long over. Most of the men I served with are gone. Sometimes young people ask me about my life. They expect stories about battles and medals. But the story I remember the most is not about the enemy. It's about the lesson I learned. War can break your body, but betrayal breaks something deeper. Still, if I could go back in time, I would still join the army again, because even though my wife didn't wait for me, my country did, and in the end, that was enough.